Sometimes a story that seems totally lost to history is just, well, it's waiting to be found. And it's often hidden in the most unexpected place, like an old family photograph. Today, we're going to dive into a story from 1901 that was forgotten for over a century. It's part genealogical mystery, part tragedy, all about a teenage girl, a prank that went terribly wrong, and a desperate fight for her life. So let's find out who the girl in the photograph really was. So it all kicks off with this quote, which comes from a family history document. For more than 100 years, a family absolutely treasured this photograph, believing it was their great-grandmother. But then, as they started digging into their family tree, they found something shocking. The beautiful young woman they'd looked at for all those years wasn't who they thought she was at all. And that right there is the question that starts this whole journey. Who was this girl, frozen in time? Because uncovering her real identity, well, it reveals a story that's so much more tragic and complicated than her family could have ever imagined. Okay, so let's start by putting the right name to the face. Because this story isn't about the woman the family thought it was. It's about her younger sister. This is Edith Amelia Shaw. She was actually born Emmelie Ida Chauvin up in Montreal. She was part of a big family that, like so many others back then, moved to Boston looking for a better life. They ended up in the city's West End, which was known for being a pretty rough-and-tumble neighborhood. And to fit in, they changed their French name, Chauvin, to the more English-sounding Shaw. Edith's life takes this incredibly dramatic, irreversible turn on one single summer day in 1901. It all started with what some people at the time just described as a simple prank. Okay, so here's the play-by-play. You've got 18-year-old Edith, her friends Catherine Crawley and Albert Cartnell, and they're all hanging out with a 68-year-old man named James Shea. Catherine, who'd been drinking, kind of playfully sits on Mr. Shea's lap and lifts his wallet right out of his pocket. She then hands it off to Edith, who quickly slips it under a tablecloth. But when Shea realizes his wallet is missing, it's gone, vanished. And the last person anybody saw with it was Albert Cartnell. Now, we're not talking about a little bit of pocket change here. That wallet had $200 in it. To put that in perspective, that was James Shea's entire life savings. So it started out as a joke, a prank, had just turned into a very, very serious crime. And what's really fascinating is how the newspapers at the time talked about this. I mean, look at this headline from the Boston Evening Record. It calls the whole thing a game of hunt the pocketbook. That language makes it sound so trivial, right? Almost like a kid's game. But as you're about to see, the courts did not see it that way. So the aftermath of this prank is where the story takes a really shocking turn. It reveals a lot about how justice back then was applied very, very differently depending on who you were. So let's look at what happened to Edith's friends. Catherine Crowley, remember, she's the one who actually stole the wallet. She already had a police record. But because she confessed and testified against the others, she got off with just probation. Albert Cartnell, who also had a record, denied everything. He was sentenced to a year in prison. Okay, so what about Edith? She's only 18. Her role was basically just to take the wallet and hide it. And this is the crucial part. She had absolutely no criminal record. None. So you'd think, probation, right? Seems pretty likely. Nope. Despite having a completely clean record, Edith Shaw got the exact same sentence as the guy with a police history, 1 full year in the reformatory prison for women. And this is the big question. It just doesn't add up. The decision was so surprising that even the newspapers back then were trying to figure out what the judge was thinking. Why would you send a sick girl, and by this time she was already suffering from consumption, which we now know as tuberculosis? Why would you send her to prison? And this quote from the Boston Globe, this gives us the answer. And the judge's reasoning is just astonishing. He was told that Edith was sick and that her home life, which the probation officer called not encouraging, was a bad influence on her. So the court decided that the prison hospital could give her better care than her own family. Get this, she was sent to prison for her own good. Now, a shocking decision like that didn't go unnoticed. Not at all. In fact, it sparked a huge public outcry, and Boston's newspapers actually led a campaign to try and free this dying girl. I mean, just look at this headline, Boston Girl Dying in Prison. It's bold, it's emotional, it's designed to make you stop and read. The papers published Edith's story, her picture, details about her failing health. They turned her private tragedy into a very public cause. and they started a petition to demand a pardon from the governor. And the whole situation just got more and more desperate. This headline here reads, "Pardon might come too late." The governor, who was the only person with the power to pardon her, was out of town and wasn't expected back for days. It literally became a race against time, with Edith's life just hanging in the balance. And if there was any doubt just how bad things were, it came in a letter from the prison chaplain Charles Glennon, which was published in the paper. He says it plainly. Edith is very low and cannot recover. He had already given her the last rites. The state had put a girl in prison who was now actively dying in their care. So, with the public pressure getting louder and Edith's condition getting worse by the hour, the story finally reached its heartbreaking conclusion. And the campaign worked. As soon as Governor Crane got back, he was met with this petition and all the relentless newspaper stories. He granted the pardon for Edith Shaw. She was going home. But it was just as the newspapers had feared. It was too late. Edith was released from prison and brought back to her family in Boston's West End. She held on for several months, but she never recovered. She passed away on June 5, 1902. She wasn't even 19 years old. And that brings us right back to where we started. Over a century later, her descendants, who thought her photo was of their great-grandmother, finally uncovered the story. A story of a stupid prank that spiraled into a tragedy. A story of a justice system that sent a sick girl to prison for her own health. And a public that rallied to save her. All of it hidden behind the face of a girl in a treasured family photo. So all of this leaves us with one last question to think about. We can look at Edith's story and say, wow, that was a different time, a snapshot of Boston in 1901. But how much has really changed? Her fate was pretty much sealed by her poverty, what people thought of her family, and her poor health. So is her story just a piece of history, or is it a timeless warning about how justice can so easily fail the most vulnerable people among us?